Hey guys, welcome back to Gatsu Gaming. So today we're going to be talking about Affliction Warlock, which is something I didn't expect to talk about anytime soon, but they did some major changes. So let's check it out and talk about it. So the biggest change you'll see whenever it comes to Affliction Warlock right now is that Drained Soul is now a talent. So we have swapped away from having Drained Soul as our main filler, and it's now Shadow Bolt. Now, Shadow Bolt is my favorite spell in the game, it's been no secret. I enjoy it in every spec. Unfortunately, it is also in 2 specs right now. So it's a little awkward, and I can definitely see why they want some variation in each spec. But the first thing we're going to talk about here is our talents. So I'm going to go ahead and close this spellbook here. And the biggest change you'll see is that the talent tree looks very different, and there's definitely a good reason for it. They've done a massive overhaul, especially this patch. They actually shifted talents up and down all over the place to make things a little bit more competitive. So right now, I'm actually running Nightfall. Nightfall is great because Corruption has a chance to cause your next Shadow Bolt to be instant cast and deal 25% extra damage. Now that 25% extra damage might not seem like a whole lot, but whenever you're getting procs of this like crazy during an encounter, it'll do quite a lot more than you expect it to. Drained Soul is still here for those that like that playstyle. I myself don't, but it is reliable. It also is an execute. It does 100% extra damage against enemies below 20% HP. So it definitely still has its purpose, especially if you know you're going to be in a long execute phase. The last talent here is Haunt, which kind of feels really awkward to be here. It is an extra button, but they did change how Haunt works. Previously, it was a 25-second cooldown on live. It's now only 15 seconds here on beta. And what it does is that on a 1.3-second cast, 15-second cooldown, deals a little bit of shadow damage and increases the damage you deal to the target by 10% for 15 seconds. If the target dies while Haunt is on it, Haunt's cooldown resets. So if you're going to be targeting very specific ads and need a little bit of extra burst here and there, Haunt might be the way to go, especially if you're able to stack up a bunch of UAs on it and have Haunt there as well. That should be some very sizable damage. Now our level 30 row here, we have Writhe and Agony, which isn't anything new. This was originally up here in the 15 row. It's moved down, probably to where it should be. This row essentially either gives you an extra dot or empowers your existing ones. So Writhe and Agony takes it from stacking up to 10 times up to 15. And this of course requires some maintenance, but Agony is also something you should never let drop off. So that's why it sits here and is typically a very solid talent. In any situation where you don't need absolute corruption, Writhe and Agony is a very solid choice. Absolute Corruption just makes your corruption permanent, or 24 seconds against players, and it increases its damage by 15%. If you're going to be doing a lot of very large pools, Absolute Corruption saves you an immense number of GCDs, or if you're going to have some, very spread damage, Absolute Corruption works really well there as well. Siphon Life doesn't cost you any mana, which is also kind of surprising. It just heals you it does a little bit of damage. It heals you for 30% of the damage it deals. It is another 15-second dot, and this is affected by Haunt as well as UA, so it works really well. This is going to be great while leveling, because obviously you're going to want that extra healing. Also, while soloing, it does quite a bit for you too. Our 45 row is our survivability / movement. Demon Skin is here. I'm running Demon Skin now because I don't really run Burning Rush unless I'm in a dungeon. This just works so well. So well. And because of the amount of overall damage you're able to push out as Affliction, it's definitely a solid choice. Burning Rush, of course, is movement, and Dark Pact for any time you need a fairly sizable shield at the cost of health. So, a little risky here and there, but can definitely save your life on those big mechanics. Now, our level 60 rows where things get very interesting. You have Sow the Seeds, which is our de facto go-to normally in live right now for any kind of AoE. It gives you Seed of Corruption is essentially a split. It hits 2 targets at once. Seed of Corruption does massive damage, even in beta still, and it's definitely a very solid choice. Phantom Singularity is really good too. If you're going to have an absurd amount of targets, this just eats everything alive. and it heals you for 25% of the damage done. I haven't actually used this one too much in beta. Didn't really see much of a need for it that either so the seeds would have taken care of, or the new talent, Vile Taint. Vile Taint is a 1.3 second cast on a 20-second cooldown. It does cost 1 soul shard. It erupts a Vile pool at the target location, dealing 8743 shadow damage over 10 seconds to all enemies within 10 yards, and reduces their movement speed by 30%. Now, this is a little hard to really get a grasp on how useful this is until you see it in action. Having a 30% snare might not seem like much, but there is so much trash that you do need to kite that a 30% snare will help immensely. Also, that shadow damage is not split between anything, that is just anything in that aura gets hit for that much. This is actually really good on single target, and will probably be the single target raid talent as well. It could potentially be Phantom Singularity, just because its passive damage doesn't cost you anything, but Vile Taint, as long as Soul Shard generation is consistent, could be a very strong player in raid. Now our 75 row here is more or less our CC / for some reason, Demonic Circle. So Dark Fury cooldown, this is standard across the board for Warlocks, as is this entire row. Dark Fury is pretty much always good. Stunning mobs in that Vile Taint does a lot for you. Mortal Coil, of course, that extra heal with that little fear. And Demonic Circle, in case you really need to get across that room fast. Again, haven't used Circle too much, but it definitely has its uses, and I'm sure we'll find some applications for it in Mythic Plus. Now, the 90 row had a couple of changes here. Shadow Embrace, Shadow Bolt applies Shadow Embrace, increasing your damage dealt to the target by 3% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 3 times. So this is essentially a 9% damage buff to your target. In single target scenarios, I don't think anything's ever going to beat this, just because it does scale. However, nothing's pure single target unless you're talking about a raid encounter. So I'm not sure if this is going to see much use outside of that. Death Bolt is a very interesting ability, although it feels pretty weak. It launches a bolt of death at the target, dealing 30% of total remaining damage to your damage over time effects on the target. It counts up to 16 seconds of Corruption's damage. Now, that's because I have Absolute Corruption taken. If I swap off that talent, it loses that little caveat, and it's because of Absolute Corruption making it permanent that it only accounts for 16 seconds, which is the base duration. Well, it's actually 2 seconds more than the base duration. But Death Bolt's really fun whenever you have some burst you need. This gives you a little bit of extra oomph, so if you have a specific mob that needs to die right away, and you're able to get UAs up on it, I'm sure Death Bolt will be able to help you make short work of those. It is a little awkward to play with, though. My go-to so far for pretty much everything I've done has been Grimoire of Sacrifice. I'm not sure if this is tuned correctly, if it's intended, but this has actually been my top damage pretty much all the time. It procs a lot. You sacrifice your pet so you don't get their damage anymore, and your attacks, spells, etc. Also deal 2,205 additional shadow damage sometimes. The prog rate, like I said, seems very, very high, and for the most part, this has done, I believe, around 20% of my damage on a typical boss fight, or even on a trash pool, just because of how many chances you get to proc it with Affliction. A very strong talent for sure, and is a guaranteed way to make sure that you never are targeting the wrong target with your Fell Puppy ever again for that incredibly important interrupt that you need. You know, or to give yourself that wonderful dispel from your imp, etc., etc. Very solid talent. Now the 100 row is honestly pretty boring at this point. We have Soul Conduit here. This is what I've been running with because I'm very shard hungry with the build I'm playing. Trying to play with Vile Taint as well as running everything else that I'm running here as far as the UAs and that and single target, and just trying to get a real good feel for how much damage I can output with this build. This has been invaluable. Just getting those extra dots out there with UA because I'm getting the refunds is pretty incredible. It's really, really great. Creeping Death makes all of your dots deal their full damage 15% faster. It cannot be overstated how powerful this is. This isn't 15% haste. This is 15% faster damage. Now, like I said here, we'll take this for example here. Corruption has a 14-second duration here. When I take Creeping, it's now 11.9. So with Creeping Death, your dots are shorter. So your rotation becomes significantly tighter. But it's also not impossible to maintain everything. And Creeping Death with Absolute Corruption is pretty hilarious. You don't get an insanely large damage increase with it, you know, nothing more than you would normally expect, but your Corruption does just tick that much faster. Now the last talent here is Dark Soul Misery. This is a 2-minute cooldown, 20-second, 30% haste buff. Again, very, very strong. If I wasn't going for Soul Conduit, I would definitely be going for Misery. 30% haste in general is pretty crazy, and just helps out so much whenever you just really want to put out the maximum amount of damage you can. Grimoire of Sacrifice with Misery is pretty crazy for the proc rate. Now, going into the Spellbook here, there were some things that have changed. We, of course, still have Agony. We have our Banish. We have our Command Demon, which in my case here, because I lost my buff because I changed the talent, I'm going to go ahead and summon my Fell Hunter again. And of course it moved it on my screen there. So here's Corruption. We still have our Healthstone and Soulwell. Demonic Gateway is still around. Drain Life is actually pretty useful as Affliction. If you ever need to Drain Tank something, you very well can. It's pretty strong. Enslaved Demon is still here. We have Eye of Kilrog that I again have not used all of beta. Fear. Grimoire of Sacrifice is of course our talent. Health Funnel to buff our pet. Doesn't do anything when you're playing Sacrifice though. Ritual of Summoning, because God forbid we ever lose Ritual of Summoning. We need that. That's kind of the reason people take us places. Seed of Corruption here, 1 Soul Shard, you know, does spread Corruption. So on our AoE, this is the first thing we should always be casting. Shadow Bolt, our standard nuke. Shadow Fury, 45-second cooldown with the talent I took, baseline 60. Good old Battle Res Soulstone. Spelllock, which is our interrupt whenever we have our Fell Hunter out or you're taking Sacrifice and sacrificing a Fell Hunter. It is a 24-second cooldown, so just like a Hunter, we are not the most reliable interrupt, but we do have it. Summon Dark Glare is our new cooldown. They just added this here in the most recent builds. 1 Soul Shard, 3-minute cooldown. I would actually really like to see the Soul Shard requirement go away because it is a 3-minute CD. But it summons a Dark Glare from the Twisting Nether that extends the duration of your dots on all enemies by 8 seconds. The Dark Glare will then serve you for 20 seconds, blasting its target for 2016 shadow damage, increased by 10% for every damage overtime effect you have active on any target. Now, to put that into perspective, if you have an AoE pool with a boss, or say there's, you know, a ton of little ads like, say, Dressarian in Darkheart Thicket, if you had a Corruption up on every single one of those, say you had 10 of those whelps up, plus the boss, if you had no dots up on the boss, but you Summon Darkglare on that boss, he would deal double damage, essentially, to that boss, which is pretty insane. Now, there are some trash packs you can use Darkglare on that it'll make super short work of anything you throw it at. This is a very powerful cooldown and will only get better as we get more haste and the bigger the pools we get out of it. The single target boss fights, this does a ton of damage. This is a really cool cooldown and I'm very glad to see we got it. Standard summon demons here. Just have our standard 4, Imp, Voidwalker, Fell Hunter, and Succubus. Unending Breath, my favorite spell that I only really use in Vashir. Unending Resolve is now a 3-minute cooldown. That's up from, I believe, a minute on Lib in one spec, and I think 2 in the other. Could just be 1 in all of them, I forget. But 3-minute cooldown, it always seems to be up when I need it, though, which is really interesting. Unstable Affliction, still a maximum of 5 out on any target. This does a ton of damage over 8 seconds. It also increases the damage your targets take by 10% while it's affected by Unstable Affliction. If dispelled, it deals the full damage of the Dispeller and silences them for 4 seconds, which is absolutely great. I don't believe there's any mobs that actually cleanse themselves, but if there was, man, would this be good. Vile Taint, of course, is that talent. Our Mastery Potent Afflictions, this just increases the damage of, in this case, Agony Corruption. It does increase Vile Taint damage, which is super notable. Unstable Affliction, Seed of Corruption by, in this case, I'm sitting at almost 50% Mastery right now, which is a pretty solid amount. Our Soul Leech, our standard, tankiness, so to speak, and of course, Soul Shards. Now, the big thing that you have to keep in mind is that Affliction's Mastery scales incredibly well. I have 849 Mastery in the current gear. This is the same gear I've been wearing in every video, I believe, since the Demonology video, so the past two. And just 849 Mastery is almost 30% additional. Your baseline is 20%. So Mastery looks to be the stat to go for Affliction right now. Haste is really hard to stack. I have the same amount of Haste almost. I actually have more Haste. And I'm only sitting at 12.68%. So Haste and Mastery are definitely going to be very important for you, but you're definitely going to want to lean harder towards Mastery at the moment, just because you're going to get significantly more damage out of that than you will the Haste at this point. Versatility, very strong stat. I have 3% right now. I wish I had more, because Versatility is just really good for Affliction. And of course, Crit, don't need much. I'm sitting at 10% here on this character. It's pretty interesting. There are some Azurite traits out there for Affliction. Unfortunately, I don't have any of the gear that has them. There was kind of a bug in beta in the last build that we got, where a bunch of Azurite gear just kind of disappeared from people's bags. So I unfortunately do not have that right now to show you guys some of those. But one of them actually increases Dark Glare damage based on some things. One of them procs extra damage from UA, things like that. So as we get more of those, I'll definitely be revisiting these closer to the end of beta, once I have some gear to show you that has those new traits on them. Now that being said, how is this performing in dungeons? Affliction for me has been working really well. It's not comparable to Demonology's AoE, but it's pretty close to Destruction's for me. Here and there, Affliction has these moments of greatness that are absolutely incredibly great. It's so high up there for a little bit, and then it just kind of tapers off when its cooldowns run out. But in those windows where you are bursting hard, where you've got all your dots up, where you've got your procs up from your trinkets, it's pretty incredible what Affliction can do. I think with a little bit of tuning, and maybe some of the Azurite traits, which I'm sure have been factored into their damage at this point, I think Affliction's going to be very strong. It may not be number one, but it'll definitely be a solid choice, especially for Mythic Plus, just because it does have the cast and move options available to it. So I wanted to thank you guys for stopping in today and chatting with me here. If you have any questions, leave some leave those in the comments there. I'll do my best to respond as quickly as possible. If you liked the video, be sure to, hit that like button. Toss me a sub on here if you want to do that. I'm over on Twitch quite a bit. It's just twitch.tv/GatsuGaming. And I'm going to go play some more beta, and I'll see you guys next time.